I'm Jim Poinsett, Executive Director of the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis. Thank you for joining us tonight for our discussion, Reflection to Action. The Interfaith Partnership represents 34 communities of faith and conscience in the St. Louis metropolitan area. We provide platforms for diverse religious voices to be heard and promote interfaith cooperation through understanding, engagement, and advocacy. Wherever you are and whatever platform that you are joining us from tonight, we are so glad that you are able to be with us, and we have some fantastic speakers to share with us the thoughts and wisdom that they have from their various religious traditions as we discuss an important topic that is very relevant at this time in the country's life and in our region, and that is the movement towards better racial equity and social change. We invite you to submit questions as we go tonight. For those of you that are on Zoom, you can use the Q&A feature that is part of you can submit the questions there, and we have somebody that will be gathering them, and we will have a bit of discussion and then hopefully leave the last 20 to 30 minutes to take your questions and engage with our panelists. On Memorial Day 2020, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. His death was evidence of the racism, nativism, and bigotry that is prevalent in our society, in our country today. In response, millions of people throughout the world poured into the streets marching for justice and change. In St. Louis, the uprisings invoked memories of the uprisings in Ferguson following the killing of Michael Brown in 2014. Remembering those days and those lessons, the Interfaith Partnership's cabinet released a statement calling on houses of worship to be beacons for social change and encouraged our civic leaders to heed the recommendations of the Forward Through Ferguson report. Now, that happened in a time as these uprisings were happening in the street. We at the leadership of the Interfaith Partnership began looking to what our role would be, how we could align ourselves with the movement that was happening in the street to come alongside and listen and to learn and get our congregants and worshipers to act in alignment. And part of that process was figuring what our role in that was actually going back to the Forward Through Ferguson report. Now, there were many recommendations in the Forward Through Ferguson report, but among all of them was an invitation for communities of faith and conscience to develop new and provide existing multi-faith assets to the region for racial equity and reconciliation. So as we began to consider what that might mean and how we could support that recommendation and align ourselves with the movement, we began to think of how the conversations that we had, the dialogues that we had, and how we could use the collective resources of the wisdom and the teachings of all of the various religious teachings that we've had to come together and put together these resources. And so tonight is really the beginning of that conversation, beginning of that examination and how we might move ourselves as people of faith and our communities of our religious communities towards working towards a better St. Louis and a better country for us all. So we are excited that we have these panelists that have agreed to share their time and their wisdom with us. And we would like to just jump right into it. And I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. And then once we do that, we will jump in with a few questions to get our conversation started. So I would like to throw it to Reverend Burton to introduce himself to us and then go through the rest of the panelists. Reverend Burton?
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Rodrick Burton. I'm the pastor of the New North Side Missionary Baptist Church, and so I represent the Christian faith specifically from an African American perspective and tradition. Good evening.
Dr. Croft?
Hello there, I'm James Croft. I'm the leader of the Ethical Society of St. Louis, which is a humanist congregation in Ladue.
Joyce?
Hi, my name is Joyce Jones, and I represent the Christian Catholic faith in the Archdiocese of St. Louis.
Dr. Lateef?
Good afternoon to everyone, or good afternoon everyone wherever you are. My name is Dr. Husain Lateef. I'm an assistant professor at the George Warren Brown School of Social Work. I'm representing tonight some of the foundational concepts from the Islamic faith. My research largely focuses on promoting positive youth development amongst Black youth, but I also have a research interest in social work practice with Muslim Americans intersecting along identities of race and nationality.
Great, thanks. Dr. Mayo?
Good evening. My name is Billie Mayo, and I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith, a longtime member of the Baha'i Faith. My work primarily focuses on looking at how the injustices can keep young people from maximizing their potential. So I do a lot of work in school districts around dismantling racism.
And Maharat Rori Picker-Neiss.
Hi everyone, I'm Rori Picker-Neiss, and I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council in St. Louis.
Thank you, and thank you all for your time tonight and sharing your wisdom with us. And Maharat, I'll start with you. We're all coming as interfaith dialogue always starts from a place of trying to gain a better understanding of people of other faiths or traditions or ethical traditions. So I would like all the panelists just to kind of go around and lift up one or two important principle or teaching from your faith that you would like everybody to know that maybe someone that's not familiar with.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity. And I find this question to be really challenging in many ways because oftentimes we have to do this in interfaith settings, and how do you sum up your faith tradition in any one teaching? And so I want to share tonight not necessarily something that is, it's not necessarily considered to be central or the most common or the one that all Jews everywhere will be able to quote, but really the one that has been coming back to me more and more in this moment. It's a quote from the Talmud, which we often call our oral tradition. It's the kind of rabbinic debate post looking at the biblical text as the rabbis really grapple with what does it mean to actually live out our faith in the world. And the rabbis engage in a series of discussions. And then at one point they're engaged in a study where they talk about, in the story that we have, the central story for us of the Exodus, the story of God bringing plagues in order to do these miracles to free the Israelites from their bondage. The rabbis understand that for each of the plagues, the Israelites seem to be exempt. So there's one plague that's facing their oppressors, but they, as the oppressed, seem to be escaping it. That if somebody went to the Nile, they would see blood, but the Israelites would have clean water. Or there would be this plague of darkness where the oppressors wouldn't be able to see, but the Israelites had this light to see. And that happens until the last plague, where they're commanded to go out and put this blood on the doorpost, so that they would know that the last plague was the plague against the firstborn, the death of the firstborn, and they're told that they have to do this so that their houses are skipped over. And the rabbis are confused. They say, why is it that they have to do this? And every other plague, that part of the miracle was that they were sort of left out of it. And in the Talmud, the rabbis give an answer to it where they say, once permission is granted to the destroyer to kill, it does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked. And this phrase has just been coming back to me more and more as I've been really struggling with this world that we live in today. And I think you did such a beautiful introduction, Jim, of laying out this moment that we're in. I keep coming back to, and whether I'm thinking about it in the context of a pandemic where you have people who feel like they might be exempt because God's on their side, right? But once destruction exists in the world, there's no way that any of us are excused. Or people who think that it's okay to ignore racism or homophobia or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or any form of discrimination because they think that they're going to be exempt. But what we see time and time again is that once this destruction, once this disease, this poison is put into the world, all of us fall sick to it. And so those are the words that have just been coming back to me again and again of this teaching of remembering that we can't ever think that we're exempt from this destruction, because ultimately all of us can fall victim once we allow it to perpetrate in our world.
Yeah, we all have a role to play in making the best of what we have here. Billie Mayo, what is one principle or teaching from your faith tradition that you would like us to know about? Need to mute.
So what I said was, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share. The one principle that I'd like to elevate and share that is a major principle for us is the oneness of humankind. We believe that this principle orders our thinking and our actions. It actually recognizes the expression of our interdependence, and it supports the conviction that we belong to one family. So if you were to ask, I believe, any Baha'i to share the major principle, major guiding principle of our faith, it would be that oneness of humankind. A quote that I'm going to share with you from Baha'u'llah states that humanity is like the human body. There are millions of cells in the body, and they play a part in maintaining and supporting a healthy body. The various cells don't compete. They operate through cooperation. They are linked in a continuous process of receiving and giving. And we believe that analogy so applies to humankind, that we're all born noble, and we all have gifts that we can offer to build this civilization, and that everyone needs to be considered and looked through a lens of equity. We are asked to look at other people as if they are our brothers and sisters, and I would like to say even beyond that, as if they are us. That's just how tightly linked we are, and how we have to operate from that premise. As one family, we can work together to save this planet. Baha'u'llah also says we are like the fruits of one tree and the flowers of one garden. And to the degree that we put these daily principles in our lives and we act on them, will we be able to build this civilization, this world where we all live together in harmony and we regard each one as noble.
Wow, seeing each person as ourselves is really a powerful word. Dr. Lateef, what from Muslim tradition would you lift up?
Sure. Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. We're very happy to be able to share a couple of words, hopefully to the benefit of those listening in. And I think, just for the benefit of those listening in who might not be familiar with the idea of how does the Islamic foundation or paradigm come to consider, any particular issue. And for us as Muslims, the two sources or canonical sources that we use to think about the what, the how, or the why for any particular issue, regardless of I think as many of my co-presenters will discuss, is that regardless of the diversity that may be within the religion itself or the spirituality or perspective, for us as Muslims, the two sources that we agree upon is the Quran, which is going to be our most holiest scripture, and also it's going to be the scholarly tradition that has been authenticated of statements and behaviors of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So from these two sources, this is where we try to think about how we should consider factors related to our lives. So bringing it back into the purpose of tonight's discussion, when we think about racial equity, or inequity in the United States, and particularly, going back to, as you mentioned, Jim, to the death of George Floyd, the question is really that, as Muslims that we have to ask ourselves is there a problem? And the clear response is yes, there's a problem. And for us as Muslims, the reason why the issue of racial inequality is a problem is that race, and really, backing up color, because race, we have to remember, was something that was invented in the 15th and 16th century to justify the economic gains, to racialize slavery, and to colonize a continent. But the issue of color and nationality and ethnicity is really the question at hand, is that do these have particular value? And for us as Muslims, we would have to say no. And using the most strongest source that we have, the Quran, we are taught specifically that among the signs of God, which we say in Arabic, Allah, is that the diversity of our languages, but also the colors that we have of our skin. And that we are told that this is among the signs for those who reflect. And another specific verse that doesn't require interpretation, that's literal, because for us as Muslims, we have verses that are clear, but also verses that require what's called ijtihad, or to think about what this really means, is that we are also told in Islam that, O human beings, or O mankind, O human beings, that we have been created from a male and a female. And that from this male and female, we have been created into nations and tribes for the purpose that we may get to know one another. And what's important about this verse for us as Muslims is that it also says that indeed the most noble of you, the most distinguished of you, are going to be those who have the most God consciousness, the most taqwa. And the irony about this statement is that taqwa, or God consciousness, as we believe as Muslims, is something only known to God. So based off these factors of when we think about what I would like to make very clear is that the issue of racial inequality is clearly an un-Islamic held belief, and thus it is in the category of what we would consider oppression.
Great, thank you, wonderful. Joyce, what Catholic teachings would you lift up for us?
So one of the things that I feel first of all, I just want to say thank you, as everyone else did. And also in my introduction, I failed to say that I'm the program director for the Office of Racial Harmony in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. And so I wanted people to know that we do have that program here. Most people, when non-Catholics, when they hear of us out in the community, they think of the charity that's given, the charitable works. And we know that that's important. We know, Maslow's hierarchy says that, until you tend to those basic needs, people really could care less what else you're trying to sell them. And so for us and for me, our Catholic social teaching, that is so key. We have 7 main themes that we take from the Catholic social teachings. And the very first one speaks to the life and dignity of the human person. And, that teaching tells us that the dignity of the human person is the foundation of a moral vision for our society, and that every person is precious. And another one of those teachings, there are 7 of them, but another one of them speaks to the rights and responsibilities, that every person has a fundamental right to life and a right to those things that are required for human decency. And when I think about that, I think about how George Floyd's life was taken from him. His dignity and his life was taken from him. We talk about the solidarity from our Catholic social teachings, and that as we are one human family, whatever our national, racial, and ethnic and economic status is. We are one human family. And Blessed Pope Paul VI, he taught that if you want peace, you have to work for justice. So in our faith tradition, we have something that our United States Catholic bishops have put out, and it's called 2 Feet of Love in Action. And it speaks to the charitable works that I talked about, meeting those basic needs that people have, but then it also talks to the social justice, removing the root causes that help to improve structures.
Oh, thank you, Joyce, for that, the lesson in Catholic theology there. James, tell us about what you would like people to know about your tradition and its teachings around acting for justice.
Good evening, everybody. Ethical humanism is a bit of an unusual religious tradition in that we are non-scriptural and anti-dogmatic. And so we don't look to a specific text, teacher, or set of teachings as the sort of ultimate guide for how we should live life. Ethical humanists can look to the teachings of different religious and philosophical traditions, but we say that we should never consider them final or ultimate. They're merely the expressions of other people at other times in response to their problems. And our founder, Felix Adler, whose words we do not take dogmatically, so we're free to disagree with them, but on this instance, I agree with him, said it is the moral element contained in it alone that gives value and dignity to a religion. And only insofar as its teachings serve to stimulate and purify our moral aspirations does it deserve to retain its ascendancy over humankind. What he meant by that was we should judge religions by human standards, by how far they activate our moral goodness, that we shouldn't judge human beings by religious standards, that we are the judge of what is right, and we should always be striving for the best in ourselves and in other people. And that's at the center of our tradition. We're called an ethical society because we strive to be more ethical ourselves in community. And I'll end with another quote by Adler. He said, "We are like a tree with the mighty trunk of intellect, the spreading branches of imagination, and the roots of the lower instincts that bind us to the earth. The moral life, however, is the fruit we bear. In it, our true nature is revealed." We strive to bring the moral fruits of character to life in our members and in ourselves. And that's what we hope to do at the Ethical Society of St. Louis.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Reverend Burton.
Yes, I had some prepared remarks so that I wouldn't ramble on, and you will find I address this in here. As I reflect upon this topic of reflection to action as an African-American preacher, pastor who's lived half a century and 2 years in this country, any starting point must begin by considering the heritage of those who come before me, who fought, suffered, and died for social action. My birth year was 1968. It also was a year when Martin Luther King Jr., that was his last year of life. He was the most prominent faith leader slain that year for the cause of justice. Reverend Dr. King, in the course of American history, was the most well-known faith leader who successfully took on direct action for justice. However, he was not the first, nor was he the last. In the African-American context, the pastor historically was the only form of leadership that was allowed. And so, of course, not all of them, but many see as a job requirement to address injustice. And so I'm not going to, roll out a list of names of people who've done that. But historically, African-American theology is saturated with the call to survive, endure, and confront injustice. And so one very common jumping off place in the Bible, which is Hebrew text, as well as the New Testament, we call the Old Testament and New Testament. There's this text in Jeremiah 22:3, and I'm reading it from the New Living Translation. This is what the Lord says: "Be fair-minded and just. Do what is right. Help those who've been robbed. Rescue them from their oppressors. Quit your evil deeds. Do not mistreat foreigners, orphans, and widows. Stop murdering the innocent." So this text, as with many texts in the Christian Bible, are replete with imperative statements calling to action to address the injustice. As a matter of fact, the inaction of correcting injustices is a posture that is thoroughly repudiated and categorically condemned in the scriptures. And so Jesus, who's the star example of the Christian faith, exemplified total action to address injustice. And so anybody who claims to be a follower of him would be predisposed to take action to address injustice. And so I'll stop with that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing that memory, Dr. King and 1968. And that's really a great segue into what I would like to explore next with all of you. And we don't have to go any particular order, however you feel led to answer this. But I've noticed in all of what all of you said about the traditions, whether it's teaching or scripture or those that have come before you to founding statements, all those are striving to be a better person and create a more just world. But having been a former minister myself, I know that just teaching those things and sharing those things doesn't exactly, translate into people hearing them and embodying them and moving to that. But just in your own personal, and we heard Reverend Burton share a little bit about his personal experience, how these teachings moved him to become involved. Some of these principles that you lined out in your own experience, how did they move you to be an actor for justice? Where was that moment where that came apparent that this is more than just a framework for ethical living, or this is more than just something I do on our holy day and then do something else during the week? How did you really come to embody this?
So I'll speak up.
Go ahead, Joyce.
You beat me, Joyce.
It's like a 30-second wait, then go.
Right. So for me, it was never, as we were talking, it was never, the discussion was never what wouldn't we do. It was what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. Never was, in action on our part. I think with Michael Brown, I know myself personally, is when I really became active and started just trying to do things to educate others on the fact that we are all one human family. And our Catholic parishes, our archdiocese is made up geographically of various what's called deaneries. And so our North City deanery, which is predominantly African American, we came up with a committee. We started a committee on interracial relations. We felt that aside of the fact that Mike Brown had been killed, he had been left in the streets for 4 hours, uncovered for any and everyone to see. And so that spoke again to that life and dignity of the human person. And we wanted to just educate people, because we feel that there's a lot of advocacy that goes on toward, the inequity, the structural racism that exists. But I firmly believe that until you change a heart, that nothing else will change, because we all know that laws can be circumvented, and we find ways to do that in our everyday life. If one of our, and just simple things, if one of our employers would tell us that we couldn't go into the break room for a particular thing, I guarantee you that we would find a way to get into that break room. And so you have to change hearts, and that's what we started doing. And our Archbishop Carlson, he established the Peace and Justice Commission, which is the umbrella that my office sits under. And we just started going about doing things to let people see what could be done, to give, like Reverend Burton just did, the history of how we got to where we are today. We went back and talked about this racial hierarchy and how, it was invented because of, the economic gains that people would get from it. And so basically, from the start, it was not, are we going to do something, but what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. And then George Floyd just added fuel to that fire that we already had.
Great, thank you so much. Billie Mayo, you were gonna say something?
Well, you know, just being a Baha'i calls us into action to promote the principle of justice.
Mm.
We believe in order to create a just society, we have to recognize, and I'm going to reemphasize, that humanity is one. And our belief in justice is not just from the sense of it's a right thing to do. It's more purpose-driven in that we think it's a moral imperative to act. From a recently published letter to the United States, people in the United States, our National Spiritual Assembly stated that all aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives must be viewed through the lens of justice. Now, on a more personal level, I can deeply share my involvement with that, starting perhaps in the 70s. I've been doing work on social justice for over 30 years, working in school districts, working with students, working with educators, working with administrators, because we know if anything's going to change, it has to start from both the top and the bottom. And so as we work in the school districts and work with educators, well-meaning educators, and give them activities or information about how they might have been operating out of a biased look or out of a biased perspective. And that if they are really diligent and they are earnest and wanting to work with young people, then they're going to take that deep dive and look at how they've been socialized. What thinkings have they had that are stereotypic thinkings about young people, Black and brown students who have been marginalized for over decades? And what can they do in order to promote this environment? And we like to say the environment is an Ubuntu environment. What can they do to create a space where young people know that they are seen, know that they are heard, know that they are safe, know that they are valued, know specifically that they can make mistakes, that this is a learning environment and they will not be penalized because of their skin color. Recently, in that same letter, there was the statement about the marginalization, as I said, of young people, and about the anti-Blackness feeling and oppression that is so apparent and so rampant in this world. And what can be done about that? Baha'u'llah said once about Black people that they were like the pupil of the eye, that they behold the vision before them and the spirit moves through them. And I can remember reading that, and that's a paraphrase of that statement, but I remember reading that when I became a Baha'i. And it locked in so deeply for me that this was a vision of myself as a Black woman, and at that time, a younger Black woman, because I've been a Baha'i for about 45 years, was this feeling that who I was valued so deeply, that I was seen as this valuable person, that I was looked at as, in a sense, as a person in maybe a favored position, because behold, before them, they see the vision. And so that motivated me even more so to do the work in the school districts with young people, to give them a vision of their nobility. And I have found that even when I say the word nobility, there is a difference in the body posture of the individuals that I'm working with the students that I'm working with. There's something about the potency of that word that just causes them to resonate in a way and to feel that just a spiritual vibrancy from that word. And also to know that they have the great capacity. They have the ability to offer gifts to the world that maybe heretofore were not recognized. I'm going to paraphrase just a definition of racism that I think also highlights what I'm saying and why we Baha'is are so engaged in creating this equitable environment. Racism is the most baneful, and I'm paraphrasing, oppression, because it limits the possibilities of those who are targeted. And it also blights the progress of the soul of those who perpetuate the oppression. And so as we work with school districts and we share what has happened, we find a way to call people out. And I'm thinking about all of the work that we have done since the deaths of Michael Brown, and even more intensely, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, and we could go on and on.
Yeah, right.
But we also find a way to call people in. So we don't leave people hanging out there, particularly those who are wanting to make a change. And we know the only way that we're going to survive this world and all of the obstacles and things that are happening is for us to work together in concert. So it is our goal to build this civilization where we work arm in arm in serried line, so that we know when something happens to one person, when that one person bleeds, we all bleed. And when that one person can celebrate, we all celebrate. The key is working together in a way that we can create this earth that was mentioned in the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth, to create that environment. And I'll just end this particular sharing. Baha'u'llah says the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity. I'll say that again. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity. And then in another quotation, he says, so powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole world. So it is our desire as Baha'is to help create that light of unity, so that we know anytime I see somebody who looks like me or who doesn't look like me, the first thing I am going to focus on for me is that nobility of that individual. That is who I am going to see from the outset.
Thank you, Dr. Mayo, for that, sharing that beautiful story of lived faith. Dr. Lateef, tell me, so you have I know just a little bit about your background and your work, not as a religious professional, but also one lived faith in your vocation, if I can use that term with you. Tell us a little bit about how your faith encouraged you to act for justice.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I really appreciate what Brother Burton said, and also Ms. Mayo also shared as well, is that there's this intersection between history that's really important when we think about the context of all of these things. So, I mean, to be very frank, how my involvement with the issues around social justice, particularly racial equality, racial equity, and dealing with the issue of racial inequalities, the reality is I'm a Black man in America. There's no way to get around that. And I wish that I could, sit on this Zoom and tell you that, this is just an academic topic for me. But it's not, and so when Mike Brown was killed, Trayvon Martin, all of these people, these are just the cases I have to remind people that make the news. They're not the totality of what happens in the Black community. And it's not even a 21st century, 20th century issue. This is a historical reality in America. One only needs to go to the research of W.B.E. Du Bois or Ida B. Wells to look how far the cookie crumbles in American society against Black bodies. So again, for me, I think connecting it to faith, and again, I think it's also important for me to be honest in my own positionality as well, is that I come from on both sides of my mother and my father's side, the Black Muslim movement, on my father's side out of New York, where Malcolm was stationed, but also on my mother's side, I come from a family of people who formed hush houses in 1850s, in churches to try to find peace from this this nightmare of white supremacy and how it affected the Black community. So, you know, I grew up in a family where, you know, these topics were discussed. And so when it came to my religiosity, my identity as a Muslim, Islam then just gave me a language to think about these things, right? And so that's really what I think my faith does for me, is that in Islam we say, or Allah tells us, or God tells us in the Quran, that, oh, you who believe, you know, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses for God, even if it's against your own self, your close relatives, those who are rich or those who are poor. So there's very explicit language from the most important text for us as Muslims in the Quran that shows that not only do we have to recognize righteousness and also oppression, but we also have to stand out against it at all points, whether it's at the micro level or the macro level. And we're also taught in the Quran that, you know, the killing of one innocent person, it's as if you have killed not all the Muslims, not all the people of your nationality, not all the people from where you're from, not all the people that speak your language, but it's as if you have killed all of humanity. So when we think about the unjust killing of people like George Floyd and the many more, this is an oppression that we have to see as affecting, I think, as Sister Mayo has said as well, that really affects all of us, and really internalizing that. And so again, for me, you know, I think as all of us, we all vacillate between different places in our lives, between being able to do something and not being able to do anything. And one idea that really holds to me from my Islamic faith is that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught us, and this is authenticated from his statements, is he taught that whoever sees an evil, let that person then change it with their hands, actually, you know, deal with it. And if you're not able to, then change it with your tongue. That is your voice, speak out against it. And if you're not able to do even that, then at least hate that injustice in your heart. And the key point that he said in this statement is that hating it alone in your heart is the weakest sign of faith, right? So your true potentiality to demonstrate your faith is to do something. And we go back in smaller levels of degrees to hating in our hearts. So again, Islam for me gives me that language to where, for me, whether it's at the interpersonal level, checking my own self to make sure I'm not oppressing someone, making sure that the people of my family can, you know, I can stand before my Lord and say that I haven't oppressed them, right? But also in society, you know, making sure that I'm standing out for those things, and depending on the capacity I have, that I do what I can.
Dr. Croft or Maharat, Rori, do either of you have, whether you'd like to be next, share something?
Do you want to go first? You know, I'm going to take this question in a slightly different way. I think for me, thinking about it much more broadly, I would say, first and foremost, for my faith tradition, I grew up particularly within the Jewish tradition and the Orthodox Jewish denomination of Judaism. And my faith is one that involves a lot of ritual, a lot of practices. So the food that I eat, or the clothing that I wear, or what I will do or not do on holidays or on Shabbat, where I choose to live. I won't use a car on the Sabbath, and so I have to live in a neighborhood that's walking distance from the synagogue that I attend. Right? It's a very all-encompassing part of my life. And when we look at text, when we look at biblical text, we see text as incredibly sacred. And we see the divine speaking to us through the text. And so for me, just knowing all of that, I don't see how it's possible for the text then not to be speaking for this moment as well. Right? That's to me the part that I just feel so compelled. And when I was in the pulpit and it was my job to give a sermon every week or every other week, I didn't know how I could read the text and not somehow need to talk about the hate crime that had just taken place the week before, or the suffering that was taking place, whether it was locally or even nationally. I didn't know how do you say that a text that is so deeply meaningful is not also relevant? Otherwise, how could that be meaningful, right? What does it mean to be immersive in a faith if it's not also speaking to us in the moment that we're in? And so for me, I feel incredibly pulled to say that my faith has to be calling me into this moment. But then within that, I think it's a question of where I feel pulled in the moment. And I want to name, and this might be a bit controversial, but I think it's important to say, and I really mean not to take away from all the beautiful teachings that everyone has shared so far, but I'm very aware of the fact that people who have also been engaged in the oppressive powers that we're talking about have also used text on their side, right? Many of the structures that are put in place have cited, maybe not the exact same quotes, right? But, you know, I can pick out a quote from the Talmud and I can pick out a different quote that's going to say something very different. Reverend Rodrick quoted from Jeremiah. We can quote Jeremiah differently, right? That the ability to, we can manipulate our text. And I think that's just really important to name, because I think that within it then, what does it mean to find my tradition speaking to me in this moment also, I think, really demands a significant amount of introspection in terms of then what we think the text is calling upon us to do, because I think that it's dangerous. I think we need to be careful, because I don't think we're talking about a situation where we had faith or we had text on our side and we have people on the other side who knew themselves to be saying, I feel like being evil today, right? They were just as able to cite text as any of us can as defense of these practices. And so I'm just very mindful, and I think it's just important to name that even as I feel very pulled via my tradition, I think it's a tradition that's very much balanced with an education of what is going on in the modern world. It's a tradition that's also very much learning from all of you on the panel, that's learning from modern scholars and theologians who are constantly trying to question how we understand this in a world that we understand today. And to me, that's what it is to be part of a living tradition, is to say that that tradition is not something that is only the wisdom of what existed 2,000 years ago or 3,000 or more or less, but has to be wisdom that has to be constantly reinterpreted in terms of our understanding of today, because those same traditions can be just as easily manipulated as they can be used for good. And I think that we have a burden upon us to really challenge both those incorrect assumptions, but even challenge our own assumptions to make sure that we are constantly investigating it within ourselves, lest we also be led astray by our own understandings.
James, did you want to add to that?
Very briefly, I just want to say I was really struck by something that Dr. Lateef said about the ethical action being the real thing, right? Because that's exactly what we say at the Ethical Society. We have a saying, deed before creed. The idea is that our ethical behavior is the religion, and the beliefs that generate the ethical behavior are secondary. The behavior is the religion, and that anyone can come from any different religious background as long as they come to right action towards other people. And the way that we judge whether religious teaching is good is by the actions it engenders in people. And that connects with what Maharat Rori was just saying, which is that, you know, I'm a gay man. I know very well how religious texts can be motivated to harm other people and for purposes that I think are evil. And you can get into really difficult, complicated discussions when you start to ask, well, if these teachings are the most important thing and following these teachings is more important than anything else, and we interpret these teachings to mean we have to treat these other people as less than, then that becomes your religious duty. And that is kind of the fundamental, that's a part of the insight that the founder of the first Ethical Society had, which is that there can't be anything higher than people's good. That has to be the ultimate good, not what any religious text says, because otherwise you could always come up with an interpretation of a religious command which would harm a person. And that's something that we would reject.
And I think, sorry, I want to just build on what you just asked, and I want you to start off answering it with, because again, I go back to what Rory said and what Dr. Lateef said, that, you know, it's the inaction that is the problem, that, you know, and the silence is what's harmful. And, but yet, you know, most of us come from these traditions that these sacred texts and some of the practices and whatnot can be manipulated in any way for what, you know, cross purposes of what we think we're trying to do or what the best good is. So all of you, whether vocationally or you're in the pulpit as Maharat Rori was, you know, how do you encourage or organize communal involvement? How does all these things that we keep saying and teaching and sharing with one another falling on deaf ears and prevent inaction? How do we move people from these things that we're supposed to be considering our title, right, reflection, and how do we actually move them to action in a communal sense?
Do you want me to step in and answer that
Yeah.
first, did you say? Okay, so
Sure, yeah.
I moved to St. Louis to complete my training as an ethical culture leader, and leader is like our term for like rabbi or something like this. Very pompous, I know. Trying to change it, but it takes time. So I moved to St. Louis in June of 2014, and Mike Brown was killed in August. And so my formation as a clergy person was in large part on the streets of Ferguson and St. Louis responding to that. And I felt both a responsibility to my tradition, which has been supportive of racial justice efforts since we started, and responsible to my own sense of what is ethically right to get involved in that movement. And that's how I got to know a lot of the people who are here and who are involved in the Interfaith Partnership, going to those protests and having those discussions. But Dr. Lateef talked about the sort of what we might call the sin of inaction. If I am totally honest, I think the Ethical Society's community was pretty inactive on racial justice before Mike Brown's killing. I don't think we really had been doing anything about it much. And I felt like it was a profound responsibility to actually do something. And there was a moment that I will remember for the rest of my life, which is I was asked to speak after going to all these protests at this big event in Chaffetz Arena. And Cornel West was there, and there were thousands of people. It was a huge, big deal. Some of you will remember it. And in the middle of that event, many young activists took over the stage. And one of them, she was 11 years old, hardly able to see over the podium, took the mic, and she said, "I want you to tell me how you really feel." Mike Brown didn't get the chance to say how he felt before he died. It was almost inhuman. What makes humans human is because they have feelings. But what most of these people do, and then she pointed to all the clergy sitting behind us, and I was sitting behind her as well, what these people do is they say how they feel and how motivated they are and what we should be doing, but they don't do it. And the whole room erupted. And I have kept that with me as like a little talisman, like a little spur to remind myself the role of religious leadership is to get people to do something. It is not to get them to mouth the right words on a Sunday morning. We have to, faith has to mean something, whatever that term means to you.
Right. Others?
Yeah, I'd like to just answer this. What do you do to encourage action? So for much of the time in the African American community, it's reacting, triaging after, yet again another moral injury, which has become just routine in American life. And what is a tragedy, but what's necessary is oftentimes you have to repair the morale of folks whom look around at a country which, for the most part admits itself to be a, Christian nation. No disrespect to the other faiths, but that's the predominant surveys, but yet you don't see, exactly, you don't see that action in the inaction or the action to root out this, the racism and the injustice. Furthermore, the reaction to George Floyd's killing may have awakened a great awareness to persistent injustice, but it really should have never been necessary if the masses of alleged Christians had followed just the most rudimentary thing that Jesus said about love your neighbor as yourself. And so James makes a great point, and others have made the point about, I think Rori also made it about, you got to constantly be reflective. You have to look into the mirror. And one of the things I think the big challenges of living in the American culture is that, especially the consumer culture, is that it engenders you comforting yourself through purchases through constantly seeking entertainment and fun, and you will not challenge yourself or deal with some of the hard issues that they might not necessarily be on the street, they're right there in the mirror. And so, yeah, sure, as a Black man, I could talk about injustices against African Americans, but, you know, there's injustices against women, there's injustices against LGBT, there's injustices, you know, you're dealing with sex trafficking, there's all types of injustices that go on, and folks are just too comfortable with all their streaming services. You know, one of the things as this pandemic is shaking people up is, oh, wow, I can't go and do what I normally do. And in the midst of that, you had a public killing that no one could turn their head from. And so I think at the end of the day, folks who are in some congregations must ask, you know, what am I doing? What am I doing? Because if you're not taking action in some type of way, and what that looks like is going to be different for every particular house of faith or community of conscience, but folks need to be doing something, because America has always been a violent country. And that's a fact. And we got to do something with that, or it will continue to be the way it is. And as that 11-year-old said, and as other young people have said, they want to see a change. And so, you know, I look in the mirror every day, and then I look to see what can our congregation do beyond triaging, you know. And then the other thing that we have to do is we're not the only people who are victimized. There's other folks who are being victimized, and I got to be concerned and conscious and standing in solidarity with them too.
And I just want to add, if I may, that like Reverend Burton just said, our country was founded on violence and subjugation. And so what we have to do is we have to confront this sin of racism. We have to confront these systems that have been put in place that continues to oppress people. And, you know, the COVID crisis, we have come together. There is so much action out there. I see people giving out diapers. I see people giving out food. When I'm going home, there are people flagging me down, trying to give me something. Everyone is coming together. But the topic of racism is, it makes so many people uncomfortable that we refuse to speak it. And so we have to confront it. And then we have to make sure that we have our faith leaders are together. I'm just going to say that one of the reasons the Black Lives Matter movement is set up the way it is because we don't see our priests walking the neighborhoods anymore. We don't see our Baptist ministers preaching about injustice anymore. We see people trying to make other people feel comfortable. We got to stop. We got to get out there and we got to make people feel uncomfortable. We also have to confront this divisiveness that we see, this speak that we see. I'm going to go back to the 1600s when there was something called Bacon's Rebellion. And Bacon's Rebellion was when whites and blacks came together and rebelled against the governor of Virginia because of whatever reason, that, there was this injustice. And so what did the governor of Virginia do? The governor of Virginia then put in place some slave codes, right? So not only do we have to act, we have to be attentive. We have to pay attention to the laws that are being passed or the laws that are being changed. The 13th Amendment, we all know about that. And so when we talk about this action, we need to get together just as we're on this panel tonight, and we need to, Reverend Burton, you need to take a section, Doctor, you need to take a section. Okay, and we're gonna focus on this. We're gonna get this done. One of the reasons Martin Luther King was so successful was because he took a topic, say the voting rights, and all his energy went toward getting that taken care of. And so we can talk about philosophy, we can talk about doctrine, we can talk about all of these things, but until we get back to the fact that we are all made in the image of my God, and I'm not meaning any disrespect to anyone else, but we're all made in the image of God, and God gave us, you know, this innate desire to do the right thing, regardless of what the text says. I believe that all humans know right from wrong, and they feel when what they're doing is wrong. And so we need to speak to that, and we need to just go forward.
And Jim, if you don't mind if I added
Please.
something to that as well, is that, you know, going again back to the question, just how do we, get people involved? How do we get people involved with this, particularly coming from the religious perspective? Is I think that there's three things that are really at play that we have to discuss, and some of it is like what Rori is saying, as well as that we have to remember that most people in America, if we're just focusing on America right now, subscribe to some type of faith, right? In some way, or even if it's not necessarily a religious faith, everyone still has a paradigm that they are filtering information through to understand the world. So on one level, we have to remember that, human beings are not a monolith. Is that even though we're talking about Muslims or Christians or Jews or, ethical humanists, we're also talking about people who have these intersecting identities that are also vying for how they see things around racial inequity, right? And so with that, I think on one level, if we think about how do we use our religious spaces, I mean, each one of us, is, coming from a community that potentially has some way to have these dialogues or conversation, is that I think it's not enough that we just say that, our religion, our faith base doesn't support inequity. I think we also need to help individuals understand, what do we mean by racism? And I think sometimes when people think racism, we think, oh, well, did I call you a dirty name? That is a form of racism. But when we're talking about the deep structural level of racism in American society, we're not talking about name calling. We're talking about things that disadvantage, children from birth in terms of educational outcomes, housing capacities, wealth capacities, life and death expectancies, right? We're talking about these deep level things. So I think we have to make sure our communities understand that. But also, I think to what Rori was saying earlier, is I do think it's important for those of us who know or who understand our religious traditions to really work to articulate why the assumptions, those other assumptions that are out there, and I think as mentioned is that, human beings have used throughout history in the name of religion to oppress people. And unfortunately, I think most of the religions present here today are guilty of that, right? All of us, in some way, people from our religious traditions, not necessarily the faiths, but people from our religious tradition have used the messages of our faith to oppress. So I think one of the responsibilities of those who know is to articulate against those things and make sure that that's very clear to our members as we think about moving forward as well. Because if we're not able to really articulate that to those who we're trying to join in, then that can be in and of itself a reason for inactivity, or also, incorrect ways of thinking about change.
And that speaks to what I've talked about, the education that my office is doing. And, the just basic terminology, what is the definition of racism? What is the definition of white supremacists? How did we get to where we are? And so that's one of the things that we all need to focus on, is that education.
I'm sorry. I can say just a little bit because I know we wanted to hold some time for questions. But I was going back to something that James said when you were talking about how we walk our talk. And Baha'u'llah says, let deeds, not words, be your adorning. Also, I wanted to really clear up that quote that Baha'u'llah said about Black people. He said, in this Black pupil, you see the reflection of what is before it, and through it, the light of the Spirit shines forth. Baha'is are engaged. I just want to take a few minutes in a program, a very, I think, powerful, vibrant program where we are in neighborhoods, helping to create these vibrant, enriched neighborhoods where people are working together to create a sense of unity and efficacy to make their neighborhood a better neighborhood. We share with them and we listen, I think is the greater of the two acts here. We listen to what is happening with them, and then we share with them certain skills around just being able to consult. And consultation is a process where we honor everything that a person says, that we don't judge, we listen, we hear, and then we work in a way that we say is coming from an humble posture of learning. What is it that we can do to assure the growth of this neighborhood, to recognize the potential that is a neighborhood? So, and it's not about creating a hierarchy. We are there to serve. These neighborhood gatherings sometimes are called study circles, where we come together to focus on means that will help us help others in the neighborhood to create what they want. This is a focus on what can enrich, what can help, what can restore, what can revitalize the neighborhood. And so as Baha'is, one of our greatest activities is service to humankind. So however we can serve, not lead, but however we can serve to help these neighborhoods grow, to reach the capacity that they can to create a space where people yearn to be a part of the neighborhood is what we do. And so we do have a method that is replicable, because all that is needed is just time for people to come together, to study together, to ask questions, to reevaluate what's going on, and then to make different decisions about how this neighborhood can be supported. We are also told to bring ourselves into account daily, so that whatever we do one day, as we focus on it, we can be better the next day. And so we are having hard conversations. We are doing what we call elevating the social discourse, so that we can actually look at what is it that we're doing, and not just look at it, but to do something about it. So there's the knowledge, there's the volition, which is the will to do something, and that is of naught if we don't accompany it with action. And what we're doing is being these active participants in society to build a better world, a world where, I'd like to say, this is my language, Ubuntu, where I have the ability to see you and you have the ability to see me, far beyond just the physical facade here. But you know my heart and I know yours.
Thank you. Rori, did you want to add to that?
I do, and I'm so grateful to everything that everyone has shared. I think there's been so much wisdom in this, and I don't want to repeat it, but I just want to highlight it, or I think lift up some parts of it. But in particular, I want to also really challenge, because I'm noticing some of the questions that are coming in are also relating to, well, what do we do with the people who are not already interested, or how do we convince people, or how do we get more people on board? And I actually think, I really actually love where James started us off with this. I think of really pushing back, right, where like, what does it mean to step into this space and actually say, maybe we haven't done enough, right? I think that, I often think about it. It was once introduced to me, this concept of productive discomfort, right? There's like this kind of sweet spot that we need to keep people in. And I think, right, this is, Joyce, you're talking about right, we have to make people uncomfortable, right? But there's this productive discomfort, because if you tell people everything is fine, then everyone stays home and says, I don't need to do anything. But if you tell people everything is terrible, then there's no reason to get out of bed in the morning. And so we need to make sure that people have like just the right amount of discomfort and just the right amount of hope, right? Things are really bad, but you can do something something about it, right? And that's kind of the sweet spot. And I think we have a power in that, but I don't think it's exclusive to faith leaders. Like, I actually really want to kind of push it back out to people, because that's something we all do. We can make this work popular, right? I mean, this is like in sort of a capitalist society that it was sort of amazing. And I think for all of us in St. Louis, seeing the difference between Black Lives Matter in 2014 to Black Lives Matter now, right? Like, Nike thought it needed to do a commercial on it, right? But you know what? Like, capitalism has a power also. And suddenly, if it's like popular for businesses to have to say that, then that has a power also, right? You can make it kind of the cool thing. And that's not something that, like, it's not because somebody got up and preached about it that it becomes cool to do it, right? But it's because enough of a groundswell starts to actually engage in it that it starts to happen. The other thing that I also want to really name is I think that everybody also has an ability to really support, if you want to see leadership, and that leadership can be faith leadership, but that leadership can be any kind of leadership doing this work, you also need to help create space for that leadership. Because the part of this that's really unpopular to say, and it's a terrible thing, but I think it's also really true, is that for many of us on this panel, right, like, this is also our jobs, right? We saw, many of us know, and we know friends who were in St. Louis during Ferguson who lost their jobs because of the roles that they played in Ferguson. People who have since left, luckily, who have found other jobs. We all probably have colleagues who have spoken out in a variety of ways and found their contracts not renewed. This could be different depending on your faith tradition, but for some of us who answer to a board, it can be difficult sometimes because you're also balancing it with, you have young children, or you have a partner, or you have a mortgage, or whatever it is. And so when I say we need to make this popular, I both mean we need to collectively make this popular amongst all people, but also this isn't something where everyone has the luxury to sit back and sort of like wait for your pastor to get up and speak about it. But I would say also, you can make it uncomfortable, right? Call your boards and say, why isn't my leader talking about this? Why, right? Because then suddenly it becomes good for our job to talk about it, just like it was good for Nike to make a commercial, just like, right? That's something that's not, the burden is not just on all of us. We have a role to play where we have a platform, but we can also lose that platform if the rest of you are not also lifting that up. And so I just want to make sure that everyone understands that none of us are exempt from this fight. Like, everyone has a role to play. Our roles might be different, but we all have to keep talking about it. We have to make people uncomfortable. We have to give people some amount of hope, and you have to make it popular. And we make it popular by just doing it again and again and again.
Yeah, so I totally agree, and that is great. That the sweet spot of the discomfort there. So what specific? You mentioned one, like, why aren't we going into our boards at work and demanding that some sort of change is one example of that. But others that have, and Billie Mayo raised some of these too. But what other specific actions do you invite people to do in considering action? Anybody? That's open for anybody.
I think I'd like to add a little bit and say that, I think in the process of getting people on board and, trying to get people to support, I think, again, for me, it's just, I think being an academic, writing manuscripts and doing scholarship or trying to get grants, are also, presenting at conferences. It's really important to be very clear with individuals what they're being asked to be involved with and why it's important. So I think, having organizations like the Interfaith Partnership, STL, these type of collaborative opportunities are really important. And again, I think we've talked about this prior to, having this Facebook Live event, is that I hope this, our conversation moves, even beyond just this panelist, because we really have to think about what is something, given our diversity of our faith-based perspectives, where can we find those thematic commonalities, not only around what the issue is, but how can we respond collectively around that issue? Because it's very possible, and I think, like as Rori says, having those uncomfortable dialogues, those conversations, that it's not going to be as roses and bushes or things that we would like in trying to figure out that, but we have to figure out what can we do together. Right? And I think once we do that, I think it makes it easier. And even for communities that are trying to, who are watching this, who might not be in St. Louis, right, working with Interfaith, but still, I think once we have that, then it becomes something that's easier to present to your faith-based institution. Like, hey, this is what we've come up with. How do you respond to this? How do you, what is your perspective on this? What can you do to support this? And in my talks, talking with different faith communities, I have come across that they want to do something, but what should they do? What does that look like? What is it? Right. Where does it go beyond being upset and angry, or even, having that conversation to have, at the church service or the Jumu'ah khutbah or whatever, to talk about it? How do you move that into a pragmatic aspect where we see sustainable change, right? And, I do like the idea of making it popular, but at the same time, I do want to make sure that we raise up the fact that our goal should not be to just, go into this idea of it's cool to, protest, right? Because again, this is people's lives, people's history. We know now with epigenetics, we know now this is literally affecting people's DNA, Absolutely. Right? So, it has to be something that's longer than, as many people say, it's not a moment, it has to be a movement.
Right, that's right.
Well, I knew this was a brilliant panel when we put it together, and you all have done a great job of answering the questions that people are posing in real time. So I appreciate that. I want to just remind people at home that there's a Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen, that if anybody has a last question or two to submit, we're happy to share that with you all. But we are running close to our time, and want to be respectful of the time of all of our panelists. And I appreciate your words and this evening. And so I guess I'll leave you with, well, here's the question I'd like to ask you. Just from this work is long and can be tedious at times. It's not a straight line. We're not going to arrive at the end tomorrow, but it's more of a circle. So where do you draw strengths from your tradition? Are there practices? Are there readings? Or what is it that you go to keep yourself sustained in working for this kind of change in the long term?
That's a hard one. I mean, since I can't abide the silence, right? But sometimes I don't feel it. Sometimes, I mean, within humanism, we have no concept of the universe should work out in any particular way. So I have no expectation that good will win in the end. I think we could lose, right? We could fight all our lives for justice and things could get worse. So it can be hard to hold on to that sense of hope. But what really I do, and I try and do for my community repeatedly, is remind people that even though we're not guaranteed to win, we have won historically. That life is better for many people than it used to be, and it's because of the work of people like us. And in this moment, seeing the response to George Floyd and comparing it to the time when we were shutting down streets after Mike Brown, it is a huge difference. The movement that exists today after George Floyd would not have happened if it wasn't for the activists in St. Louis and Ferguson. It would never have happened in the same way. It made a huge difference to how this issue was perceived. So I just try and remind myself we are making progress, or at the very least we can. We can if we do it right, because we have in our own community.
And I would like to say, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Okay. For me, as most Christians, I have the Word of God in the Bible, and I know we've talked about the fact that people will use His words out of context, but I do have the Word of God, and what really gives me strength is the suffering of Christ. When I think about how they beat Him all night long, I like to say. They beat Him and then they hung Him on the cross. And He did that because He loved me. And He did that so that I would be saved, so that I would be redeemed. I feel every time those people were sitting at the lunch counter and did not get up, when we go back to history, that they had the strength of God in them. And that's where they drew it from. I tell people all the time now that I want somebody to sit at the lunch table with me. But I also say that we need to do it with gentleness and respect. And my guiding scripture for that is 1 Peter 3:15. And James, in that scripture, we talk about the hope that we have. And we talk about we have that hope in Christ Jesus. And we are always ready to give a defense for the hope that we have. But we do it with dignity and respect. And so for me, it's the word of God, it's the suffering of Christ, and the fact that my ancestors sat at a lunch table so that I could be where I am today.
Others would like to share on this?
Yeah, I would just add a few words to this as well. And so again, some of my research, I actually study identity and how these things intersect with mental health and well-being. And one of the things that's interesting that we do see historically for the Black American community is that religiosity has always been a part of that epistemology of trying to define success, right? So I think the question of how do we keep going, it really goes back in some ways, how do you define success? How do you know success? So, you know, on a basic example, sometimes when we think about going to college, you know, or being in school, we define success based on GPA and graduation. Those are like the indicators. But of course, when we think about overcoming systemic racism, historical trauma, these again are the things that, for unfortunately many things that go beyond just one generation, and that we don't get to see the full victory in one lifetime, right? Or as James say, we don't know exactly if we will completely see it how we would like to, but we know we have to do it. And so, you know, from the Islamic tradition, you know, we say, or we believe that all actions of good are a part of what's considered ibadah or worship. So when you are doing things that are in line with what God, or what we say Allah in Arabic is, the Arabic word for God is, when you're doing things in line with that perspective, you are successful. You know, and again, as I've tried to make clear earlier, is that one of the assumptions of Islamic framework is that standing against oppression is a part of doing what we would consider God's work. So whether you see success in your life, your children's life, or you never get to see it exactly, as long as you are standing against oppression and doing your utmost. And again, being honest with what your utmost is. You know, sometimes we say, well, I shared this post, so I did my utmost. So you have to be honest about what your utmost is. But as long as you're doing that, then we are successful.
Billie?
Well, so just referencing this long journey of eliminating racism, we're told that it's a thorny path beset with pitfalls. And so during this time, I felt great sadness and anguish and questioning, but I was never confused about what can happen and what will happen. We have this indefatigable hope of this world being this place where people will thrive, where all of those things that I've mentioned about the oneness of humankind and everything that derives from that will actually exist. Now, will I see it in my lifetime? No, but it does not make me work any less for the realization of that condition or that circumstance or the way the world will be in the future. And I just want to read just a little bit here from some of the writings. It says, for those who aspire to lasting change, we have to be, and I know these are words, but I'm wanting us to take them in and internalize them on a deep level. And that if we do this, then we can make that change. We can begin the process of that change with our deeds. So we have to be tactful and wise. We have to be penetrating in our utterance. We have to be indiscriminating in fellowship and unfailing in sympathy for the downtrodden. We have to be courageous, and this is where the action takes place. We have to be courageous to step out there, and we have to persevere in our actions. And that's where my unfailing hope, my unflagging hope comes from. And we have to be strong in the face of tests, and finally, unwavering in our keen sense of justice. And so, and I appreciate the words of all the panelists, because they have been encouraging. And I appreciate the opportunity to just be here with my family members.
It has been encouraging and oh so helpful. And we are running a little bit on time, so we're going to have to leave it here for now. But this is the beginning of a long conversation of how we, the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis, and all of us as faith or as religious leaders in our various communities and traditions can come together and
that might be it. At the end?
We can't hear you. You have to unmute. There we go.
Thanks everyone. I will finish up remarks for Jim, and thank you all so much for your time, and thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all the attendees who joined us.